Though we associate old-school PlayStation with mascots like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, it's important to remember they weren't always the guys on top. In fact, Sony went through a whole lineup of characters before striking gold, one of them being Blasto. A gunslinging, quip-spitting intergalactic hero, he starred in his own platforming shooter developed in-house by Sony themselves. And though the game wouldn't release until early 1998, it had secretly been in development since way back in '95. You know what else was being developed in 1995? Star Fox 2. And you know what both Star Fox 2 and Blasto have in common? Dylan Cuthbert, who was the lead programmer for both. I've been meaning to talk about this one for quite a while now, and after learning that it came from the same place as some of my favorite games ever made sealed the deal. So hey, let's take a look at Blasto. In true PS1 fashion, the game opens with an Fmv cutscene where an alien tyrant Bosk rallies his army. Turns out these guys want revenge for being sent to the dreaded 5th dimension, planning to attack the planet Uranus, with their overall goal being the conquering of Earth.
I will enslave their women, eat their children, and rape their cattle!
I'd comment on what we all just heard, but I feel like it speaks for itself. We're then introduced to Captain Blasto, voiced by late comedian Phil Hartman of Saturday Night Live fame. Admiral Big Shot here tells him to get to work saving the babes trapped on Uranus, and the talk concludes with this A1 piece of comedic genius.
Good luck, and remember, Uranus is on the line.
So what else is new?
Ha! Nice. So it's up to Blasto to defeat the aliens and rescue the captive babes, all the while traversing a multitude of settings, be it space stations, deserts, and even lava infernos. As I said earlier, it's a platforming shooter, so it has a bit of everything. Blasto's got a basic jump, which along with being able to grab ledges is handy for platforming, as well as a sidestep that lets him dodge enemy fire. The controls are very much tank-based, but given the shooty nature of things, facilitate a smooth experience. Surprisingly enough, you're able to use the right analog to look around, but only when standing still. You can also lock the camera into any position by clicking the stick, which I've never seen done in any other game before or after this one, and if you're anything like me, you might be thinking that's because it's pointless, but no, it makes the platforming infinitely easier since you're allowed the perfect angle to see what's ahead. You can also perform a quick turn move by jumping while moving backward, which comes in handy whenever you're being attacked from behind, but can just as easily become a mega pain in the ass. Not only is it possible to trigger on accident, which happened more times than I'd care to admit, but doing so close to the edge of a platform can see you falling into the game's many abysses since for whatever reason Blasto doesn't stay in place. On the combat side, you're outfitted with a handy Blastomatic, a sidearm that can be fired back to back, as well as charged for added oomph. It does a pretty good job taking care of threats, and while it can be a bit pea-shooterish at the start, you're able to pick up tetrawatts to increase its overall strength. There are some pretty cool details as well, with each power level having a different color for the laser beams, and a particularly brutal edition that sees enemies losing their heads whenever hit by a fully charged shot. Also, if he's close enough, Blasto starts swinging on him. Alright, whatever works, I guess. The pistol can also be modified by numerous pickups scattered throughout levels. Rapid firing, a flamethrower, heat-seeking missiles, nukes, ice beams, alien generators, and even a very elusive one-shot kill variant. They all fit different scenarios. The flamethrower melts everything it comes into contact with, the alien generator is essential for solving puzzles, and the heat seekers provide an easy way to take out threats without having to be too precise. Even then, the aiming, whether free or targeted, is pretty generous since you only ever have to be close enough, with Blasto doing most of the work. Overall, it isn't too bad. Save for how annoying the quick turn can be, I found myself really enjoying the gameplay. Compare this to Argonaut's very own Croc, which also made use of tank controls, and Blasto fares a hell of a lot better. Speaking of Croc, Blasto puts his aquatic ass to shame by being an infinitely better swimmer. Though the game doesn't concern itself with too many underwater levels, the few that are present work well enough. Pretty much anything done on land can be done there, including strafing and quick turns. And since it came out in the 90s, there are even a few levels where you can fly around with a jetpack. Regardless, the overall goal is consistent. You're to run around maze-like areas whilst shooting things and solving puzzles, primarily those based around hitting buttons to unlock doors to access otherwise inaccessible locations. The gameplay is very much a fusion of what was, at the time, all-new 3D platforming with that of boomer shooters like Wolf 3D or Doom. There are terminals that allow you to download fragments of the level's map, picking stuff up causes enemies to spawn in most of the time in waves. It's very clear what Sony was attempting to to replicate. Blasto himself is an almost PG version of Duke Nukem, rescuing babes, fighting aliens, and throwing out zany quips, but he's nowhere near as much of a chatterbox. Phil Hartman reportedly spent a total of 6 hours recording all the dialogue in a single day, so there's quite a bit of material here, but the Gex effect is nowhere in sight. Even if it was, I wouldn't mind. I'm one of those crazy people who loves that Gex never shuts up.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a gecko.
Okay, shut up. In addition to the gun pickups, you can also get your hands on things like pills that grant health and invulnerability, as well as extra lives, and even doodads that turn Blasto invisible. Though I've gotta say, the effect it has on enemies is quite humorous. It's less like Blasto disappears and more like the aliens become dumb, randomly aggroed to the point of firing where there's nothing to fire at. Rescuing babes also sees you rewarded with health and 1-ups, which is a serious godsend given how tough this game can be. There are 3 things certain in life: death, taxes, and getting your ass handed to you in Blasto. Fortunately, save points are abundant and extra lives aren't too hard to come by, but assuming you run them down, you'll have to fall back on continues. These 2 are limited, but can be increased by killing every enemy within a level, which is much easier said than done. Not unlike how there are a differing number of babes that need saving, so too does the enemy count fluctuate, often reaching the hundreds. Thankfully, this is not essential to getting 100% completion, because if I'm being honest, there were only a few of the total 12 in which I successfully killed every enemy, and even then, the continues were never an issue. Blasto was actually lambasted for its difficulty back in '98, with many outlets citing its brutality as its biggest issue. And I mean, yeah, it's tough, but I've definitely played harder games, some of which came out before. I'm looking at you, Rayman. Come to think of it, these 2 games have a lot in common, given how spawns work for enemies and items, and how you lose everything upon death. Speaking of, a few of the enemies pissed me right off, with my least favorites being any of the ones that can fly. You've got these Silver Surfer assholes and annoying eye dudes that shoot fire, but then you also have to deal with ground turrets that launch explosive spikes and can only be damaged by things like charge shots and bombs. For what it's worth, the enemy AI exhibits many impressive responses, often rolling out of the way when being shot at, but good luck noticing any of that when trying to avoid death yourself. Aside from the shoddy quick turn, which is probably going to haunt my dreams for years to come, I only found myself truly irked by moments where I had no idea what the hell I was supposed to do. Obviously, the labyrinthian nature of levels coupled with the inevitability of missing one babe factors into this, which happened to me on quite possibly the worst level for it to happen. But moments like having to use the alien generator to distract the snarf just rubbed me the wrong way. And I get it, the subtitle for the level is "How do I get past the snarf?" But other than echoing my own thoughts, it did nothing to help me progress. I guess that's why they make up for it by letting you kill the bastard later on. And that, my friends, is how Mr. Incredible gunned down Mike Wazowski. There's just a ton of stuff that can be missed if you don't know to look out for it. Level 3 has this room filled with pickups that can only be opened by an enemy that you are going to shoot because why wouldn't you? Every other alien up until this point has been hostile. There's even a missable boss fight against an evil Blasto clone at the very end of the game that unlocks a warp room that you can use to go back to previous levels. This is almost essential if you've missed any babes given the game's linear nature that sees episodes bleeding together, so for it to be shrouded in such secrecy is crazy. Come to think of it, a lot of this game is ridiculously cryptic, not the least of which is thanks to these buttons labeled "Do Not Press." Seems straightforward, right? After all, the one at the start blows you to smithereens. Well, what if I told you that a few of them should be pressed, because instead of killing Blasto, they end up helping him? I know I'm starting to border on nitpicking here, but unless you've already played the game and know which buttons to hit, there's a 50-50 chance between insta-death and something as innocuous as Blasto's head swelling like a balloon. But how about the things I liked? Well, for one, I'm a big fan of this game's style. The look of it, the music, the humor, I found myself having a blast, and for what's essentially an early PS1 title, given its drawn-out development, this is a nice-looking game for the time. There's plenty of fogging, sure, but the details added to the models and environments do a pretty good job making up for it, which is doubly impressive given the developers did it all without any pre-existing graphic libraries, meaning everything you see was made expressly for Blasto. It's just one of those games where the devs went above and beyond. Like, in an effort to circumvent in-level loading, the team made it so that data was constantly being streamed from the disc. Of course, this little trick came at the cost of Redbook audio, and all of the music had to be done in MIDI, but it makes the entire thing much less of a hassle. And really, where else can you ride around on a giant alien chicken named KFC? If you can look past what many have written off as a janky, frustrating struggle, there's a quality title to be found here, oozing with trademark PS1 charm that we all know and love. But is it worth 100%ing? Despite completing it myself, I honestly can't say. After being ravaged by his harem of babes, which is probably the most normal thing to happen in this game, Blasto finally meets up with Bosk, whose fight sees him controlling a robot before flying around. Commandeering an escape pod, Blasto makes it out just as the place explodes, and after another wacky talk with Big Shot, the credits roll. For your efforts in rescuing every babe, you're rewarded with the Babe Viewer, also known as what kids in the late 90s without the internet had. I think I speak for most when I say it takes a bit more than 32-bit PlayStation girls to get my rocks off, so other than the disco mode, which looks like a bad trip, this'll only keep you entertained for a minute at the most, which is coincidentally all the time said kids in the late 90s without the internet needed. Despite its shortcomings, Blasto sold well enough for a sequel to be greenlit, though it was just as quickly canned, as on May 28th of 1998, only 6 weeks after the game's release, Phil Hartman would be murdered by his wife. The whole thing's a cautionary tale of drug use and relapse, but what matters is that Hartman was 49 years old, and along with him would die a unique brand of comedy and wit that will never be replicated. Bit of a downer ending, I know. But mentioning it was important. Phil Hartman was a legend, and his performance is one of the reasons this game is remembered. Futurama fans will know that the character Zap Brannigan was created to be voiced by him, and in a really neat way, Blasto here provides an interesting look at what could have been. So hey, check it out. You might just find yourself having a blast.